We lost everything we had.
This is the largest disaster that I've personally worked.
It has been an amazing process that we've all lived through. I doubt that there's anybody on our city staff that haven't been involved in mucking out homes.
We're going to live here as long as we can.
Funding for Minot, Rebuilding Dreams is provided by the Margaret A. Cargill Foundation and by the members of Prairie Public.
Somebody comes up and says, how is it going? You say, oh, great, the fact is I owe $300,000, and I don't know how I'm going to repay it, but if I live till I'm 85, maybe I'll repay it by then. You put a good face on it in a good North Dakota, Minnesota way, and the truth is that it can be pretty hurtful for a lot of people.
We are a tale of two cities with a very, very tremendous growth going on, coupled with this disastrous flood event. So our folks have been trying to balance those things, trying to take care of the daily work that needs to be done, and at the same time coordinate with all of our federal and state partners.
Honestly, we thought we had pretty much held things in check as far as the melt, and we took care of it. But then the big rains came up in Canada, and the next thing we knew, we heard that they were opening the gates on their dams, and we were going to get that water, and it was going to be here quick. We didn't have a whole lot of time to react.
Throughout June, it got some rain events, and then the big event occurred, and I think the number was about 17 inches total for a number of events in the upper part of the basin. When that occurred, it just overwhelmed the system, and Canada held back as much water as they could for as long as they did. We started doing daily calls with the Weather Service to see what was on the ground so we could operate the reservoirs, and eventually the reservoirs couldn't hold more, so they just had to pass what was on the ground. It's almost surreal. You go to an affected area and you see homeowners' belongings floating down the river, stacked up. Their homes are destroyed, and it is very, very devastating. I toured with Major General Temple. He came up to visit, and his first comment was, "This looks like what occurred at Katrina."
It is an emotional event. It's one of those things where it's hard sometimes to look back at the video of the event. I can guarantee you that there isn't anybody in this community who won't tell you exactly what they were doing at the time that the siren went off on June 22nd.
The Souris River flood of June 2011 shattered all kinds of water flow records in the basin, spewing water into places and at levels that would have seemed unthinkable only months prior. But 2 years after the sirens went off on June 22, 2011, the town and citizens of Minot are slowly but surely coming back to life.
I think the city's doing pretty good. Would we like to have moved faster? Of course, but if you go through the valley, I mean, it's remarkable at the number of individuals that are back in their homes, individuals that have made the decision to rehab their homes and different things like that. Our sanitary sewer was one of the biggest issues that we had, and it's really quite remarkable how far we've come considering we had a whole winter in there that we had to deal with.
In some ways, I think we've made very good progress. The fact that we have now over half the people that were in FEMA temporary housing units now out of those units, I think is a very good thing. The temporary repairs that need to be made for street repairs and traffic lights and traffic signals, lift stations, and the wells being in operation, all of those things that needed to be done just to have basic operations. We've been pleased with the progress.
In our schools, that has been a tremendous challenge for us. We're using the city auditorium as a middle school, and we lost Lincoln as a elementary school, but we're now building a new middle school up on North Hill, and we've added to Longfellow as far as more classroom space. We're still crowded, and we're crowded because of the energy folks that are in town. But we're getting back on our feet as far as the education.
One of the biggest challenges in recovery and mitigation has been the lack of housing available in Minot, making it hard for displaced residents to find any place to live.
It's very difficult for people to find housing, and affordable housing is the key word there. You do see more houses coming online right now, but I know just in the last month when I went up 6th Street here in Minot, there were like 6 or 7 houses that were for sale, and it was like, wow, that's really surprising. But within 3 weeks, they almost all had a sold sign on them. So the houses still are moving very quickly, And we're the ones that are usually looking for the grant monies, and it's difficult because the federal partners are here to help us, but they have regulations that they have to follow, and there's not a lot of wiggle room with those regulations.
Complicating matters in a catch-22 kind of way is the oil boom in western North Dakota. It makes housing tricky to find, but keeps Minot's economy chugging along as it recovers.
The economy is great for certain people, but the people that were here, that have lived here pretty much all their lives are struggling. The oil thing is good, but that's for the people that are working for the oil companies, which is good for them.
We have consultants that have been in and worked with us since probably last September, and they're from all over the country, and they will say that they have never been to a disaster that is like Minot. We're incredibly unique because of the oil boom. And also, in fact, I just got done with a call with Moody's because we're just getting ready to sell bonds, and we were able to maintain our AA2 credit rating, which is pretty unheard of when you've suffered a disaster like we have.
Which leads to the big complicated question, how to make sure this never happens again. The Minot City Council has approved a footprint forward, calling for a massive $850 million flood protection project, a combination of new dikes, home buyouts, and diversions of the Souris, and even in some curvy areas, a straightening out of the river.
The toughest neighborhoods are probably in the Lincoln area where we lost a school. We plan on doing a diversion through there, so that will take several houses. And we plan on doing a diversion on the east side of town, not taking so many houses, but that's another area where we will have to take several homes just to widen the dike system that we have. We plan on doing 2 diversions with our project, one more to the west side of town, or the western side of town, the other on the eastern side.
We have been working with the State Water Commission. We know what their plans are. We've also been asked to do a reconnaissance study from the state governor. We've submitted that to our headquarters as well. So we're very involved right now, and we would like to be more involved to help. Some of my employees feel quite responsible for what occurred in Minot because they were there from day one all the way through the event. They feel culpable for what occurred because they couldn't do more.
None of this will happen quickly, as the dike and diversion plan will require hard-to-get federal funds. In the meantime, another big help to Minot has been the steady influx of volunteer organizations like the Salvation Army, Red Cross, and AmeriCorps, helping out residents.
I'm with the AmeriCorps National Civilian Community Corps, also known as the NCCC, and I'm the team leader for Maple 2, helping to demo and power wash, sanitize, everything we can for homes that have been damaged by the flood. I would say the most important thing is that we care. AmeriCorps cares, our team, Maple 2, cares a great deal, and we are very happy to be here.
We really appreciate AmeriCorps. I'm sorry I didn't mention that, but they're really doing a fantastic job.
I just hope they remember that they'll be getting in their houses sooner because we did the work that we did, and I'm extremely thankful I can do that work for them.
In the long term, officials say if they can get the housing shortage under control and get flood control finished, the future of Minot is very bright.
We're thinking we're probably, in our last census, we were at just under 41,000 in 2010. We've got to be approaching very close to 50,000 now, so we've gained a lot of people. I think it says a lot for a community to come together at such a needy time, first of all, and so quickly.
It's been really saddening, but we'll move on. I want to stay, so we're going to stay.
By Monday morning, I got updated information. So on Monday at 9:45, we went on the air in advance of a 12 noon press conference that had been scheduled, and that's when the mayor said there will be mandatory evacuations and Minot will flood. Once we got on the air, it was impossible to get off the air. We had to keep on delivering the information. We went a full week. I think somebody figured out like 171 hours or something like that, straight through. We kept saying the same information every hour and a half or two, but people were just, clamoring for it, and radio stations locally picked it up and ran and simulcast. And so people could listen or watch no matter where they were throughout the area. Just 4 or 5 days after we started doing it, Joe Goldaddy, who was one of our meteorologists, had set us up on a thing called Ustream, and that was put on our Facebook page. And so people could click on that and watch our live feed anywhere. Ustream gave us a report about 5 days in that said we had had 1.2 million unique viewers to our stream over the past 5 days. So, you know, think of Minot, North Dakota with 40,000 people. We've got 1.2 million viewers in less than a week. I couldn't believe it, really. Never done any construction in my life until a year ago. I moved in on January 1st so that I wouldn't have to pay rent to FEMA because they were starting to charge rent as of then. So we moved out of our FEMA trailer, even though our house wasn't really completely done, but it was certainly livable. Just to give you a personal side of what I just said is I'm sitting now at the age of 55, and now I have a mortgage until I'm 85 as a result of what's happened here with the flood. That's just the way it is. And I had to rebuild where I was. I couldn't afford to go find land somewhere and build something else because it was just out of the range of most people to go buy anything. In general, I would say the town is recovering pretty well from this catastrophic event, but there are these pockets of really desperation that still exist that really nobody knows about. It's really kind of a hidden thing out there that there are a lot of people that are really in a bad way. What I've been doing a lot of days is I go in at 6 o'clock or so in the morning and work maybe until about 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and then spend the rest of the day working on the house in some way. People say, you know, why are you rebuilding right where you got flooded? Well, I don't have any choice. I have no other land that I can go to. I can't afford to go buy other land simply because of the situation in the market. And then beyond that, I have faith, I think, in the people who are operating, for instance, the dams that are supposed to provide some flood protection. I think things will change if there's any year like what we had last year. It's not even just North Dakota to me, it's almost just human beings getting together and doing what needs to be done. I think we do it better maybe than many places in North Dakota, but we've got a big representation of people from all over the country here at the Air Force Base through this oil boom that's going on. And when the flooding was starting, there were people just marauding around the neighborhoods with trailers driving up to houses saying, can I help you haul stuff and put it somewhere for you? What do you need taken out of your house? We're here to help. Including people from Canada who came down and said, you know, let us help you. I think the town will continue to improve in all kinds of neighborhoods. I mean, we have parts of town right now where there's just nothing going on because they're in this never land of, you know, do we rebuild or is it going to be swallowed up by this dike plan or what's going to happen? So there are those places where it's very destitute looking, and that's just a fact and it's understandable. But I think in 5 years, those questions will have been answered.
I don't know how to explain that. It just drains you. It just takes something out of you. It's just, you can't explain it to somebody because I don't know how you would explain it. We're just drained. Financially broke, worse than we were the day we got married, and that was 38 years ago. We had a company build us a new home. We built it a little bit bigger than what we had. Everything's new in it, which is kind of nice. The old home was just in too bad a shape, so we made the decision to tear it down. By the time we were getting ready to make up our mind what we wanted to do, it was more than half gone after we tore the house down and did all that work and then what we had to live on. We did have a FEMA trailer in the yard, lived in that until the house was moved on, the new house. I think the lesson that they learned is they're going to have to learn how to control this better. I don't think that they really realized what was going to happen. You know, that rain they had up there didn't help it. I'm thinking that, you know, when they see what the snowpack is and stuff, and they've been letting water out of Lake Darling now, so I think they're looking at controlling it a little differently than what they did. The problem is trying to get a loan. You got to have something to back you up to get a loan, and if you've lost everything and you don't have anything in an account and you can't get that upfront money to get into it, you're just SOL.
We had a high snowpack, and the snowpack was melting at the same time the rain hit, and it was just too much to be able to control through the reservoir and channeling system that they had.
When you have that much water, I don't think there could have been a whole lot different things done. Certainly I don't want to point fingers at anyone. We just didn't know the reach and the amount of rain that had fallen up in the further reaches up in the Souris Valley. And when that all hit, I'm not sure anybody could have done anything about that.
One of the great questions that arose from the Souris River flood was, could anything have been done differently? The massive June rains in Saskatchewan put stress on reservoirs and dams, and the International Souris River Board, consisting of U.S. and Canadian board members, was put in an unenviable position.
We were all talking pretty much every day about what they were releasing. We were taking that into our account and how long it would take to get to Lake Darling, and then our release, how long it would take to get to Minot.
To me, that's the category this flood is in the Souris, is that we have flood protection structures in the Souris, Red, and elsewhere all over the United States, but there's a limit to what we can protect for, what we can build for, given the dollars that it takes. In this case, at the end of the day, I can't say that things might have been done to tweak the system, but it would have been very minor. The big ones are Rafferty and Alameda in Canada, and then Lake Darling in the US. And those systems, again, were every time we would get these events, we'd try and get a handle on it, and they would try and bring them down, and they'd gain a little, but could never get them back down anywhere near normal range.
I think there was an initial, I want to find somebody to blame, and the water came from the north, so it must be the Canadians' fault. But it was fairly early in the process that I know through my job in reporting on the news, we were quick to say this was not Canada's fault, this was not Saskatchewan's fault, this was an international agreement that was managing this river. If you find fault, you have to find fault with the makeup and how they devised that plan.
My neighbors all say it could have been controlled a little bit better, and we probably wouldn't have had the disaster we had.
Despite the general consensus that the flood was the result of the so-called perfect storm and not the fault of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers or the province of Saskatchewan, many Minot residents still remain suspicious and want solutions.
I don't want to put words in the mouths of the people in Saskatchewan, but it would seem to me that if I were their public relations person, I would suggest saying this. 2011 was an extremely unusual year. The amount of rain we received in 2011, moisture between winter snow melt and then the spring rain, the amount of moisture we received in 2011 was just off the charts. So we know that's a fact. We also know that it's a fact that we followed the letter of the law to the best of our abilities. We have a 1989 agreement between Canada and the United States that says, here's how you operate this river system. We followed those rules. So yes, we did everything we could within the constraints of the rule book to do what we could to mitigate this flood. And I would say, as a comeback to that, the answer to me is that the rule book needs to be changed. Obviously, it could have been done differently. It wasn't done differently because the rules were in place. I just want to see them take a hard look at that rule book and come up with a system that says that, yeah, we can let out some more water earlier in the system in a very wet year like that, and then we'll have less water piled up in behind those dams if we get a big rainfall in June, like is what happened in 2011.
And indeed, the International Souris River Board is now looking at new rules to make sure this doesn't happen again.
What the Corps has done since that time, we've met with the State Water Commission from North Dakota, the Saskatchewan Watershed Authority, and we developed a charrette, which is basically, let's change some variables in the system and run that event through that model and see what could have been done. So we looked at changing target flows in Minot, changing target flows at the border. What happens if we raise storage at Lake Darling? Would that have any effect? And what we determined is if you got a combination of all those things, we could have lowered the peak in Minot for a certain amount of time. But that takes an extraordinary amount of energy and time and money, first, to develop those scenarios, two, to get the authorities to change the agreement, because that's a very hard task to do. And we're in the process of doing that. The Souris Board is looking at the agreement to see how we can fix it and change it. There are things that could have been done looking backwards.
The 1989 rules said that they were supposed to send no more than 5,000 CFS of water through Minot. That was pretty simple. It's the target flow rate. And by adhering to that rule, it allowed the level of the reservoirs in Canada to just keep rising and rising because it was a very wet spring. Pretty soon, the dams are full. The dams are holding back as much as they can. And all of a sudden, they get this significant rainfall that threatens to just break those dams, so they have to open them up, and instead of 5,000, we get almost 30,000 CFS in Minot. Now, if you change that target flow rate from 5,000 to 10,000, You let that amount of water out over that earlier time period, you're not going to have 30,000 CFS that will have to be let go at the end.
But coming up with new and more flexible rules for the future won't be easy. Water issues are hard enough within a single state or province. However, when dealing with water issues shared by two countries administered by both American and Canadian board members, finding common ground can often prove virtually impossible.
Just so everyone knows, the International Joint Commission is made up of Americans and Canadians, but they don't speak for either nation. Same with the boards. The boards are made up of different agencies, state and federal, local members from each nation, but our charter is to not represent our agency or our nation. We're supposed to represent the basin. And I think the Souris Basin is going to be challenged in that regard, because if you look at the Canadian aspect, they don't need much flood protection from the Souris Basin. In the U.S. side, they need some flood protection.
As a U.S. member to the International Souris Board, the whole purpose is a board that we report to the International Joint Commission, and that's to look at and uphold the 1909 Boundary Waters Treaty Act. And it's really to prevent disagreements between provinces, states, and countries.
And the twists and turns of the Souris River itself makes flood control a tricky proposition. In fact, Minot's hill and valley terrain is problematic as well. Houses sitting on the hill in Minot were basically unaffected by the flood.
It's more of a hill and valley type thing instead of a plain with a river running through it. So it does make difficult situations, and it snakes a lot through town. And after the floods in the 1960s, 68, 69, they straightened out the river in some places. And part of the new proposal is to straighten out the river in a couple more places as well, to try to get it through town more quickly.
When you enter a series of wet years, large areas can change from non-contributing to contributing. So therefore, a lot of your engineering decisions were based on a fixed drainage area, when in fact, because of these last few wet years and then this overwhelming amount of moisture in 2010-11, we probably had a much larger basin contributing to that Minot gauge.
Minot's basically the catcher's mitt. There's hills on both sides. So to move away from the river there, you got to move up the bluff.
In the end, Price is confident better international rules and flood control options will eventually be put in place, but it will take years to accomplish.
First, there was a lot of anger, as expected. Now I think there's some people that still want to know some answers. Am I going to be bought out, or am I not going to be bought out? What's the levy plan look like? And I think the city's been pretty good about answering that. Every time I go back to mine, I'm just amazed at the community, how they've come together and have recovered. Every time I go, you can see steady progress. Every day I go there, it's different, because the community says, we're going to come back. And that's part of the culture of North Dakota and the Great Midwest, is that we don't let Mother Nature beat us. And you can see that in Fargo and Grand Forks, and now you've seen it in Minot.
This is a split four-year home, so it has 4 levels, counting the true basement. I know this house had water in it at least 3 weeks at varying levels. As you can see in the garage, we have it ripped out. This is a 10-foot ceiling. We had it over 9 feet. There were several markers on the wall where I could see how high it was. This is the back of the house, the addition. It was within inches from the top of the ceiling inside the house. And then of course the higher up area is 3 bedrooms, and it was 31 inches up in the upper level. So 31 inches it got to on this level, and as you can see, the mold is climbed up well above that level. You can see mold even in the mud on the floors right now. The amount of mud in here is incredible. On these lower levels especially, and it certainly had a lot to do with, I think, being close to the river. There's some mold up in the corner there. If you can see it here, it's definitely went through the drywall, and it's probably in the insulation. There's mold right up in there. We're looking at years, definitely. If I'm allowed to rebuild, it could easily take a year or two, I think, just because so many of us are in this situation. Finding help and finding contractors for some things could really hold things up. Ever since we were allowed back in our homes, gosh, I think the 16th or 17th of July, I've been here every day, and of course, like most people, we're all working too, so it makes for some long days. I'm a marketer for Faro North America. We sell propane in about a 6-state area, and we also truck other products in mostly related to the oil field. Right now, we're mostly running off generators. We're kind of on a waiting list to get our temporary power turned back on. So I've had mine inspected, and talking to the local energy company, they said within 2 days I should have plug-in receptacles outside that I can get some light back in the house and do a little bit more work. We have the garage and the basement done, and I think we have about 2 more weeks of work, and once we get it tore out and dried up and sanitized, I plan on locking it up for the fall and winter and just kind of see what we're going to do for the future. Oh, you're looking at the dike in my backyard, which that was built after the '69 flood, after we had some issues in the neighborhoods here, and it's of course still our backyard. The water was several feet over that when we flooded last summer when you came to visit me, and as you can see right now, even up on the top level of the home, you can't even see the water. I think it's almost stagnant right now. It's not really moving, so I just hope it stays that way. Really wasn't any other recourse for us since it was a fairly new mortgage, no flood insurance. We had to rebuild. As you can see, quite a few of my neighbors though have been able to leave their houses for a while. Most of them are up for sale. People are still trying to decide what to do. But as you see, coming through the neighborhood, there's many, many homes for sale right now. Probably the first thing was I went on to the City of Minot webpage and looked at contractors available, and then tried to get some references. That was one tough thing about rebuilding early, was finding people that had already had some rebuilding going on. Got some contractors over here, got some bids, and kind of started looking at the process of what I wanted to do, what I thought I could do affordably by myself, and then what I need the contractors to do. I would say it came out to about 60% contractor and 40% I did myself on certain things. We lived in a rental north of Minot for most of the fall until I think late November. We got a FEMA trailer moved in and parked it right in the front yard and kind of sat on it for a while to see what the plans were for the City of Minot. The toughest thing with the rebuild, and one thing that those that are getting ready to do it, if they're going to use contractors, you as a homeowner become the general contractor. That's almost like another job to take on. So with my regular job and that, and trying to be a good parent, it's pretty stressful. Well, this is the master bedroom. We were up here late last summer. Pretty big change in a year. Just this past 3.5 weeks, we've got fully moved in the house and got the FEMA trailer out of the front yard. So it's looking pretty good. It's feeling much more like home now. Overall, I'm happy to have a home again. I think it's great that we have an opportunity to live right here again. But, you know, there's some downfalls. We see many of our old friends and neighbors gone now. But that's part of the process, and we'll just keep moving forward and hope that our new neighbors, when they eventually arrive, are as good as the old ones.
What we did is we provided the basics, which were food, shelter, clothing, and took care of those folks while they were out of their homes. At the peak of our sheltering, we had 5 shelters open, and we did what we could to help those folks who were displaced. As time went on, the lack of housing became a major issue. We sheltered folks for almost 6 months, which is kind of unheard of as far as the Red Cross is concerned. Things have changed a lot since the floods of 2011, but the Red Cross is continuing to help people here in the community. A lot of what we're doing now, referral to other long-term agencies that help in the long-term type thing. What we're doing in our part of it is we're still continuing to assist those folks that are working on their homes. For example, last summer, we had our Rebuild Minot project, which was basically our mobile feeding units out in the community, handing out food, water, cleanup supplies. And along with that, we had our volunteers out there, and they were basically talking to those folks who are working on their home. I think besides the bottle of water, the most important thing was for people to have somebody to talk to as they're working on their home. And moving forward into this summer, we'll be doing the same thing out there, helping those folks that are working on their homes. Once you get that many people involved, then things start to get quite complicated. I think that's where we're sitting at now, and I think the city's doing a great job in the planning process, but it's going to take some years to get through that. And I know that there's a lot of concern for people moving forward. Are we going to have this infrastructure in place before the next 500-year or 100-year flood or whatever you want to call it comes into play? And that's the main concern for a lot of people. I know that it's been a struggle here. I know that a lot of people are concerned about it. It looks like a lot of us are going to have to do a lot of the work ourselves, especially on our own homes, and be creative. I mean, it's an unfortunate way to say it, but it's just kind of a fact of life. The economic situation in the United States is such that we can't depend on funds that we're going to get from FEMA and so forth. We just have to step up and do our own work. We had over 2,000 volunteers here that helped us out. We had local volunteers, we had volunteers from around the state of North Dakota, and we had volunteers from all over the United States that came here to help us out. And we just appreciate the fact that they were here to do what they could to help the folks in Minot. These are caring people, like I said, that came from all over the U.S. and did what they could to help us out. We just want to pass along all of our appreciation for them and everything they've done for us.
I don't know one person that wants to live in government housing or have the government as their landlord. At least I don't know any.
Stuart Dole of Minot voices what many think when they think of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It's an organization residents affected by a flood are glad to see when disaster strikes, but also are glad to see leave at some point. And while the famed FEMA trailers are essential in a disaster, there is nothing better than when a resident can leave it all behind.
This is my last day here at the FEMA park. I found an apartment here in Minot. So after a year, I've moved in last October.
Part of when we look at hiring people, we want to make sure that they have the values of the agency, and that's people taking care of other people, and have empathy, can understand that frustration, and are there to help those disaster survivors and to work through those issues. One of the programs that we do bring in our individual assistance program is disaster crisis counseling. As of this morning, we're at 457 inhabited temporary housing units, trailers, serving 453 families. Now, 77 of those trailers are on private sites, the homeowners rebuilding and living temporarily in them. 380 are still on our group sites.
FEMA's presence in Minot has been a long one, longer than usual in similar disasters. The lack of housing in Minot has kept some people in trailers longer than the typical 18-month period allowed by FEMA. In fact, effective January 1st, 2013, the 18-month period was up, meaning those still in trailers had to start paying rent, which leaves some unhappy and confused.
Of the occupants we have, most have appealed that rent, and we work to recalculate that down to 30% of their gross income.
Even if I wasn't involved in this, if a person actively has a plan to get out of here and you can go over and look at our houses being rebuilt, I don't know, I guess I would appreciate a little more leniency from the government, but to try to help people like that out.
They've been good. They put a lot of money into the city, and like I've said before, when they first came in and reached out to our citizens with some of that individual help, it was great. As we've gotten into this further and starting to get reimbursement and that type of thing, it's a little more difficult. We've got just under 1,000 FEMA trailers that are being used right now. The main FEMA park out on 55th is probably our biggest park.
FEMA typically pays out a maximum of $30,000 to affected residents, which is much appreciated. And the trailers, some of which sit right next to damaged homes, provide much-needed shelter.
We enjoyed it. It was a nice little place to live. It was sitting on my son's front yard, so we were close to two of our grandkids, just within steps. But on the other hand, by the end of it, it's funny how we were starting to get just piles and piles of stuff around because it's so small. And it was getting to the point where we had to get out of there pretty soon or we might not be able to get in and out the door.
Mine has been quite good to me. I have no problems with it. Doesn't leak. Everything works. And we're quite happy with that.
You know, we never ever complained about the FEMA. It was small, but we had something to live in, so that was nothing to complain about. And the children never complained about the space, neither did we. So we kept it positive and they kept it positive. They had fun.
And FEMA has been active in almost every aspect of Minot's recovery.
In Minot, we had the issue of schools being damaged and destroyed, and initially we came in with the ability to put up temporary structures so that they could resume school within a couple weeks of their planned start date. And I know they're in process of building and completing new schools at this time.
As for the inevitable red tape sometimes fairly or unfairly associated with FEMA during disasters, Carol says this is something they are trying to clean up, though again, it depends on who you talk to.
Probably one of the most significant changes is occurring right now. In the Hurricane Sandy legislation that was just passed and signed by the President, we're actually relooking how we do our public assistance program, top to bottom, or as we said, a bottoms-up review of the program. And the legislation is allowing us to look at implementing changes to how we manage debris removal, how we bring projects together, how we get money out to the community quicker.
I think the red tape has been awful. My house had to be demolished. It was a total loss because 2 of my 4 basement walls were collapsed from the flood. And early on in the process, after the flood, the idea was floated by FEMA and by the state with FEMA money that they would come in and take down my house and haul it away and it would all be paid for and that'd be great and it would help and wonderful. I appreciate that. Well, month after month went by and then it was, well, we're not sure if we're going to be able to haul it away. In the end, I had to pay to take it down and had to pay to go dump it in the dump. So I had to pay to bring the pieces of my house to the dump ground, whereas people next to me who had partial damage had it picked up and hauled away by FEMA.
The Corps worked for FEMA during the recovery effort, and I know there's been a lot of angst over how some of that recovery effort occurred and what happened. You come up to North Dakota and try and build housing pads to FEMA standards, they didn't exist. We had to do some engineering, planning, and looking at where we're doing this effort and change some things. So it cost a little bit more money, it took a little bit longer time, did not meet FEMA's housing standards because it's just a much harsher environment to try and build in.
Another negative for Minot has been that because 90% of residents had no flood insurance, there's less of an infusion of government and insurance payout money into the city compared to similar disasters where people had flood or tornado insurance. For now, FEMA remains in Minot with about 50 on-the-ground workers, and despite calls in some quarters to use private companies for disaster response, most residents still feel FEMA is the best way to go.
I totally agree with the perspective that this is a government responsibility. This is our nation standing up to take care of our American communities, our states, and we're there to come in as a partner with the state at their request to help them and the communities respond to, prepare for, respond to, recover, and then mitigate from disasters. I think it's an upbeat mood in Minot. Things are progressing. We work with the city as well as with the Minot Area Development Corporation. Their efforts to, one, recover, and at the same time, they're also in a boom mode, a building mode.
Well, I built this house in 1962. That's right after we got married, got a couple kids, and been living here ever since. I got it to a point where I retired from the railroad, almost had my house where I wanted it for retirement, and look what happened.
New ones on the block, as I call it. Everybody else has been here forever.
40, 50 years?
Yep.
Throughout the years, banks say we didn't need no flood insurance when we took out a loan or nothing like that. We're not in the floodplain.
It wasn't a concern to us when we had to evacuate the first time. They said water never got anywhere near us in the road, and that was it. So we were pretty confident nothing was going to happen. Even the second time we had to evacuate, we did take everything out. We were still pretty confident, but as you can tell, it's a little different story now.
We took anything that wasn't nailed down. We took appliances, we took the furnace out, we took everything we could get out. If we would have had more time, we would have grabbed probably countertops, kitchen cabinets, doors.
A lot of our kitchen stuff was left in, the fireplace, the stove, the freezer, and a lot of the basement stuff was in. Couldn't take any of that. The road situation with the trucks moving back and forth, it was hard to even get around.
First opening the door, I mean, there's still water in the grass outside. Opening the door, I mean, the smell about knocked you over. Probably 120 degrees, high humidity, just the devastation you've seen, the mud, the debris, the mold in the ceilings, a ceiling fan curled over like a dead flower, the fins were just bent down. It was just difficult to even walk through and imagine what had happened.
Got to right here. Got everything as far as electrical work on the main floor, and everything had to be gutted.
We aren't able to afford to have anybody be paid to do it for us, so we did it all ourselves. Took a couple days with a lot of hard work and family and friends, and we got it down. And he's been over here every single night since we've been able to get back into the house doing projects.
We moved back in about 3 weeks ago, where we came in and opened up the windows to air it out a little bit. Then it was about 3 or 4 days later, we did get in and started gutting the upstairs, but the basement was still full of water. Me and the wife could have never done it, but we do have 25 grandkids. We just plan on doing the main floor. The garage will stay, the basement will stay. We'll be in before Thanksgiving. We do want to have our Thanksgiving meal here, yes. We thought we'd probably be in by Thanksgiving, but nothing would have been trimmed out or anything. Our cupboards didn't come in time, so we decided just to have Thanksgiving at my daughter's place, and they live about 4 blocks from here. And we thought we'd have a little more time and have Christmas here, which we did. I ended up trimming most of the windows out, and we're kind of a close family. Well, the kitchen stayed about the same. The doors we had taken off, like I said, and those we put back on. The boxes, the top box were okay, except around the pantry and around the fridge we had to replace. The island we had to replace. And the lower cupboards here are all replaced. We're in the process of finishing our basement off, and this is going to be a rec room with a TV on the end there, and probably a couple of couches there, a foosball table up here, and then we got a bedroom into this room. That's a fairly big bedroom. And we got sheetrocked and taped. And on the end of this wall will be some just storage, a couple big bifold doors, and then shelving in the inside for storage. We painted everything in the basement walls with a Kill paint to neutralize the smell of being flooded for so long. We did get our FEMA money, but then I applied for an SBA loan, but I didn't take that. Bank of North Dakota came out and gave us $30,000 for a 1% loan. And that kind of helped, but it's far from being enough. It's livable, and yet we're here to work on it. If it's working in the garage or working in the basement, at least I'm here. I'm probably fussy, but it takes me longer to do things, and I don't have the energy I did 20, 30 years ago. I know that. 10 years ago, I retired from the railroad, and we redone our house, and we thought we'd stay here because we got Most of our grandkids are in Minot here, and they like to come over every weekend. They're here. If we would have moved away, it wouldn't have been home for them. So we decided just to, well, it took a little crying, but we did get over it. And we're probably glad we did.
I hated every second of it. Cleaning process, first we had to get all the water out, because when we did get back in the house, it was still up. We couldn't even come downstairs because it was on the main floor still. So we had to wait for that all to get suction, dried up and vacuumed out. And once we got that out, we did come down here and strip everything. Got all the old wood out, and we did scrub the wood with bleach and scrubbers. So every single piece, the wall, the cement, everything was scrubbed, including the ceiling boards were scrubbed with bleach. Waited for that to dry out, and that had plenty of time because then we started on the upstairs before we did anything with the basement. My husband had chemical burns down his arms from doing the ceiling because it just ran down. That was probably one of the things I just dreaded, was going back and brushing it with the bleach, trying to get all that done. It wasn't fun, but we knew it needed to be done, and we couldn't afford to pay anybody to do that. So that was some long hours with one light that we had to share because we only had so many light sources at the time. So we just kind of moved from room to room and scrubbed it and got it done, sprayed it down and let it dry. A lot of phone calls too, people trying to get the electricity going and all that. We finally got a hold of somebody to do that. My uncle has been helping us tremendously. He has been our godsend. He has helped us rebuild everything. We only hired out so far for the electricity and the heating system to get done. Other than that, we've done everything ourselves. We had originally moved in with Ben's grandma, and then we did get a FEMA trailer, and we lived in that until we got everything done here, and then we could move in. And we kind of went back and forth until the kitchen got done for 3 months, and then we got rid of the FEMA.
Prior to this, we hadn't had any experience rebuilding or remodeling or anything, but now when we've done it from the ground up, we're pretty handy now.
Yeah. This is my son Jaden's room. He likes all of his animals. He was very excited because once we came back into the house, he had a big boy bed. Before the flood, he did not. So he was very excited about that. I can't believe we did all this in a year with, like I said, full-time job, 3 children, and everything else that goes along with that. And we've come a long ways, and every day I think, wow. And every day that we get more of the basement done, I think, I can see the end. A year ago, I could not see that. I didn't see how we would do anything, but we did a lot in a year.
I think we're 100+ days above flood stage. Very few places in the country do you find that. It's, the GS all over the country, we go out, we work with our cooperators, but in a lot of places, we'll have people say, oh, we've been out for 7 days, or we've been out for 10 days, we had a big flood. They're there and they're gone. The damage is left behind, but Minot, similar to the Red, and even more so than Red, it lasted all summer.
In reanalyzing the Souris River flood of 2011, the numbers and the amount of water are mind-boggling. We asked Greg Wicke with the U.S. Geological Survey in Bismarck to examine what made this flood one for the books.
If we look at the Souris at Sherwood, the Souris at Minot, the Souris at West Hope, the whole loop, basically the peak, depending on what station you were at, was 2 to 2.5 times greater than the previous peak at all those stations, and the volume was 2.5 to as much as 3 times greater at all those stations. So it wasn't a flood that hit just Minot or just Sherwood. It was the whole loop that experienced records unlike anything they've ever seen. When we were talking with the individuals in the water resource community, you could see just there'd be a pause on the phone trying to just comprehend that, and of course every now and then there'd be the question, is it worth checking? I mean, it was just so far out. You didn't want to believe it, but the numbers usually verified.
Wicke says a good way to look at this flood is in terms of the volume of water Minot was dealing with. He says the flows into Minot were so far beyond any previous record set in Minot that it would be like if a Fargo Red River flood would suddenly go from a previous record of around 41 feet to around 65 or 70 feet, meaning Fargo would flood.
We have about the same length of record on the Souris River at Minot, but the flooding that we experienced in 2011, with both in the peak flow and in volume, was on the order of 2 to 2.5 times the previous peak. So it just puts that flood so far out there. It's not just a little larger, it's just way outside the bounds of anything we'd seen.
Looking back, Wiki agrees the international rules set in place essentially tied the hands of the Corps of Engineers, Saskatchewan, and flood fighters. But if not for some horrible luck in June, they still might have dodged the bullet.
We really had two floods in Minot in 2011. The first one was the spring melt. The city passed that one under extraordinary emergency conditions. We built 13 miles of levees, and we were there fighting the flood. And the National Guard was there, everyone was there, the town evacuated. That achieved about 8,000 cubic feet per second, and everyone took a deep breath and thought, we're done.
The setup was actually probably the fall, early winter of 2010, with rains much above normal soil moisture. The beginnings go back into 2010. By early June, when the big rains came in southern Saskatchewan, northwest North Dakota, there was just no storage left on the landscape or in the reservoirs.
It was clear that all parties involved in putting together the flood protection plan back in the 80s and 90s fully understood that it was a spring flood event that we were trying to protect against. Clearly today we understand that's not enough, and that there has to be more work done in managing the water that comes through the system, so that in those years where there are high snow amounts and very wet conditions, the amount of water that will be released through the system will increase more quickly and more rapidly.
Bottom line is, diking and diverting a windy river like this that stretches across international borders will not be easy, and most agree they'd rather fight a spring flood than battle an unpredictable summer flood like occurred along the Souris.
We aren't an area of the country where you expect to get these large basin rainfalls that produce record flooding over a big basin. I mean, this area of the country certainly gets thunderstorms that can produce flash flooding on small basins, but when you start talking about the Sourises, the Reds, the Cheyennes, that hasn't been our normal experience.
There is light at the end of the tunnel, and I think it may be different here than perhaps it was in Grand Forks. I honestly don't believe that we'll get the financial resources that Grand Forks got. If you look at the funding that they received at that time and figure it on what would you need to have the same amount of dollars today, we've not received anywhere near that kind of federal assistance, and honestly, with the condition of the federal budget, I don't think that we will. On the other side of the coin, because of the oil impact that's going on here, the economy here is stronger than any of us have ever seen it. It is just a tremendous booming economy. And I think the combination of those things can lead to a community that will be very different in 5 years, 10 years. The flood control side of this, I think, will take at least a decade.
Considering the devastation the Souris River flood caused, the fact that the city of Minot and its citizens are functioning, and in many cases functioning well, is nothing short of a miracle. And as the city moves into an uncertain but hopeful future, the lessons learned from this once-in-a-lifetime event will guide those involved and guide other communities who may one day have to go through the same thing.
I think we've made good progress over the year and a half. Certainly we've got a long ways to go. I think we've made a little quicker progress than you might see in some communities. I think this community is just one that likes to get after things and doesn't want to be held down very long.
Looking back, I know I mentioned that you can never prepare for something this big, but as far as lessons learned, I would say that in this area, we have to learn that we might have to shelter longer than other parts of the community. We know that. We didn't know that at the time. It wasn't something that we planned for, but our volunteers stepped up, the community stepped up.
We are making some great progress. Not as fast as I would like it. I'm sure not as fast as the citizens of Minot would like. But they're looking at the entire basin. We can't just protect the city of Minot. If we just focus on Minot, then we're foregoing all the other downstream communities. We're foregoing what's going on in Manitoba and in Saskatchewan. So right now the agreement is focused clearly on a target flow in Minot, but it takes into account the entire basin. And so what the Souris Board and what the Corps and the state are looking at doing is looking at the entire basin to see what changes we can make so that this doesn't happen again.
We look at the flood levels and what the new 100-year floodplain is if it needs adjustment. Our mitigation staff in Denver works closely with the Corps of Engineers in making those determinations because it affects flood insurance programs.
I think everyone understands, both Saskatchewan, Manitoba, North Dakota, all understand what occurred in 2011, and we have to do something to ensure that either that doesn't happen again, which we can't control, or we can mitigate that we would react to that if that event did occur again.
I feel real good about the way things are going. A lot of times I like to think, where would Minot have been right now had we not had the flood? We would have been a booming city. We had things in place to grow. I think in 5 years, we'll be back to that point. We'll be a bigger city.
Funding for Minot, Rebuilding Dreams is provided by the Margaret A. Cargill Foundation and by the members of Prairie Public.
To order a DVD copy of Minot Rebuilding Dreams for $29.95, call Prairie Public at 1-800-359-6900 or visit our website at prairiepublic.org. The DVD also includes the half-hour 2011 documentary, Minot When the Water Recedes, as well as the 2013 half-hour studio show, Minot Rebuilding Dreams Update.